Aboriginal death in custody, biopower from the colonial practices and First Nation peoples' resistance. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers are advised that this video essay contains names and images of people now past and resting in the dreaming. Hi, my name is Crystal, and I'm an international student from China, studying a Master of Social Work qualifying degree while working as an assistant for the peer-led programs here at Western Sydney University. In this video essay, I'll be discussing Aboriginal death in custody on the Australian landscape. I will start with delving into the statistics that depicts the severity of this issue, then attempt to reflect the data through a comparative case study themed in the death of Miss Dhu and David Dungay Jr., where I'll be drawing on the theories such as intersectionality, system, and critical whiteness, integrating them into the discussion of Foucault's discourse of the state's biopower and colonization unveils the continuance of colonial practices in the Australian criminal justice and medical system and the ongoing fightbacks First Nation peoples have been doing regardless of the struggles. It will be argued that the inconsistency between the settlers' law and Indigenous values directly caused the overrepresentation of Aboriginal people's death in custody. The implemented policies actively and purposefully neglect of such inconsistency contributes to the perpetual denial of the Indigenous people's human rights in carceral contexts and lead to more tragic yet unnecessary death. What is considered as death in custody then? The Australian Human Rights Commission defines the term broadly as the death whenever occurring a person who is in prison custody or police custody or detention as a juvenile, with elaboration of death caused by traumatic injuries, lack of proper care, fatal injury occurring when getting detained or trying to escape. Despite the dated data analysis illuminates Royal Commission's efforts in providing effective interventions and recommendations that leads to around 10% reduction in the death rate of Aboriginal in custody in the late 1990s, the number from 2008 to 2021 indicates otherwise, with an average of 14 deaths per year in Australia with a trend of growth. Fast forward to 2021, 30 years after the first Royal Commission report with 339 recommendations to address the disproportionate rate, the Australian government fails to fully implement the proposed recommendations and complete the reform. Not only the quantitative data mentioned above points to the government's ongoing inability in responding to this long-standing issue in contemporary Australia. The following qualitative study in the form of comparative case analysis of Miss Dhu and David Dungay Jr. also offers insights regarding colonial practices with Indigenous peoples in carceral contexts. Miss Dhu was arrested with her partner on the ground of unpaid fines and put in police custody, where her complaint about pain got ignored and led to an infection of ribs from domestic violence, which costed her life. Whereas David Dungay Jr. was arrested for sexual assault and being part of robbery. Being diabetic, his need to eat biscuits in jail was denied and replaced with the injection of sedative that resulted in his death. Miss Dhu and David Dungay Jr., their deaths are linked with their Aboriginality and its intersection with other different social identities, which depicts how they are marginalized in prison. Intersectionality refers to how the overlapping identities can form discrimination and marginalization. Engaging in intersectionality to compare and contrast these two cases, the common social characteristics, Aboriginality overlaps with primarily gender and health. Miss Dhu's case of unpaid fines leads to death prompts a meditation on how Indigenous women are treated without human rights and dignity. Klipmark and Crawley's article outlines her encounters with criminal justice system and medical institutions and how the police officers and medical personnel don't have to pay for their unprofessional behaviors and below the standard treatment. In a similar vein, Justice Action's report regarding the recommendations for the coroner based on David Dungay Jr.'s case notes the lack of accountability for abuse. No criminal investigation, no charge for murder, no further training. Such systematic failure can be explained through systems theory, where the priority is maintaining the equilibrium between the system and service uses that requires users to be adaptive to the status quo and suppress their willingness to change. Giving up on challenging the state's authority equates with not seeing Miss Ju and David Dengay as human beings, but rather another two lives that can be wasted, another two numbers contribute to the death in custody statistics. Morton Robertson employs critical whiteness theory to conceptualize the epistemic violence against indigenous lives. She critically discusses Foucault's discourse of government's biopower as a disciplinary and regulatory mechanism, then identifies the limitation of this discourse situated in exploring the relationship between biopower and colonization, with the conclusion that biopower produces whiteness as an invisible norm through universalizing the white fantasy and disavowing the indigenous sovereignty. In cases like Miss Ju and David Dengay, such universalization of disavowal manifests in controlling and criminalizing their bodies, terrorizing their lives, and disavowal manifests in excluding them from public sphere. This disposition, through over-incarceration and biopolitical management of its indigenous population, becomes the core of Australian sovereignty, singling out one underprivileged group through overrepresentation in the criminal justice system and underrepresentation in the employment market. Lindorf argues that the relationship between the states and indigenous people creates power struggles with political space calls for resistance, which is seen as a reaction to states' exercise of power. Regardless of the problematic history of Australian media stressing on the areas of dysfunction of indigenous communities such as health, housing, and education, the participation of media enables the promotion of support groups such as Ali's for Miss Ju and the Dengay family. Additional memorial practices like graffiti for Miss Ju and rally for David Dengay Jr. publicizes the private concerns and transforms the individual laws into a collective laws. This loss is caused by the settlers' state, and indigenous death in custody is only one of the many areas of dominance indigenous people face on a daily basis. It is beyond death, family tears, support groups, and the incomplete cause for change. As a social work student who works for university, I had the honor to attend the seminar organized by Western Sydney University Law School to listen to David Dengay Jr.'s story in person. Meeting the Dengay family has helped me specify the colonial practices into reality and realize the strength and resilience of the community, not as victims but survivors. Failure and Briskman urges social workers to stop seeing through a dominant lens and promoting the values belong to the Western paradigm because they will risk implementing the policies that are inconsistent with indigenous cultural values. Having understood how criminal justice, medical, and health agencies are instrumental in shaping colonial power in and beyond the carceral settings enables me to be fully aware of the gap between policies and what it takes for the indigenous peoples to reconcile and heal from this intergenerational trauma. Bearing this in mind, I will critically look into social work curricula and heavily engage with reflective practice when working with the indigenous people in the future.